we commemorate the 12th March on the 12th itself. That's why if it's a week during the week, like tonight, we have to do it in the evening. If it's Saturday or Sunday, then people will turn up. But that's what we have to do. So we have dedication prayers for the women who sacrificed their life for the independence of Tibet, and also women and children who are suffering in Chinese prison under the Chinese occupation still. And as you probably know, there are a lot of nuns and lay women and young men, they are burning themselves, thinking that Chinese will stop the pressure, but they are getting very, very tough lately and very strict. And there's nothing much we can do, just voice our opinion or demonstrate, and that's about the only thing. Nobody seems to take much notice, because as you probably know, that the media channels hardly mentions anything about this self-humiliation of Tibetans in Tibet and Chinese oppression. But nowadays, you're talking about the Middle East and all these things, one after another, Afghanistan, Middle East, Iraq, everything. Nobody's touched anything, because I haven't seen anything on the news, BBC or ITV or anything. So anyway, let's hope that they will take some note of people who have no voice inside Tibet. And once we are out, but we are very minority, and unless the government sort of change their policies, there's nothing more we can do, only pray. And today, the 21 Taras prayer is dedicated for those people who sacrificed and they're suffering in Chinese prison. And anyone who is suffering in the world, not necessarily Tibetan, but anybody who is suffering, but in particular for Tibetan women. So, I won't keep you, sorry to be late, but anyway. And I have Lochoe who is going to talk about Tibetan women now and then. So afterwards, after the prayers, and which I'd like to say thank you for, before I forget, because I usually go to the kitchen and I forget to thank them. So anyway, thank you very much for coming. And
thank you, Regala, for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts and feelings about Tibetan women. It's a subject very close to my heart, and I always tend to end up discussing about Tibetan women when I meet with friends or during my work, how important it is for Tibetan women to participate in things, in all aspects of our community life. Saying that, I remember as a young girl studying in the Tibetan schools, every morning we would do our prayers like we did now, and we would pray to Manjushri, which is the Bodhisattva of knowledge. Kangloma, my Tibetan friends here will know. And in there's this stanza, it says, Dosokula Pujik Tatse, meaning like the ultimate love is the love of a parent for the only son. So from there you can see, traditionally, Tibet, the Tibetan community is a male-dominated society, no doubt about that. But on 12th March 1959, when the Tibetan women went to the streets to protest against Chinese occupation, I think it started a new chapter in the Tibetan history, where the women took a stand. And since then, I think things have accelerated, and now you can see more Tibetan women represented in the Tibetan community. And I think Tibetan Women's Association has done a great job, and the Tibetan women, I think we owe a lot for having that association to push the Tibetan women, provide a platform, and recently they've been doing lots of leadership training, I've noticed, and I think that's great. When I was growing up, I didn't hear anything of that sort. Even in the village where I was growing up, the local leaders everything was male. Everything was male. And in my lifetime, to see that kind of change, I think it's great. And I'm so happy I'm talking about this issue today with you. What I'm sharing with you today, it's my personal experience, my personal perspective and observation about the exile community. I don't think I can talk about the situation inside Tibet. It's so different, and talking about one issue across the Tibetan women in Tibet and in exile, I don't think I can do justice to that. So it's what I'm talking to you today is mainly about the exile community. Before I go on to that, I want to pay my tribute, remember and offer my prayers to those brave Tibetan women who took a stand against the Chinese occupation, and in the recent past, 5 out of the 26 who made the ultimate sacrifice for Tibetan freedom, and I think it's admirable, great, and I want to remember them today especially. And then also I want to remember Werse. I think she's incredible, so brave, living in China and writing all those things on the internet. I think the prizes that been offered to her, it's most deserving, and she's continuing to fight with her words. I think that's great, admirable. And then coming back to the exile community, I think the most public face of Tibetan women is Pajam Kushu Jizu Pamela, the sister of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And she is behind one of the most successful organizations in the Tibetan community, I feel, the Tibetan Children's Village. Just thinking of all the children that are educated there, coming out of that institution, many of you here included, I think the impact and influence of work is immense, and she's rightly been offered the title Mother of Tibet. And interestingly, she was also the first Tibetan minister in the history of Tibetan Kashak, and also before that. I mean, she was the first woman, and I think she has started so many trends in the community, and I want to thank her for that. And then talking about other representation in the public offices, the Tibetan Parliament. We had the first Tibetan women parliamentarians in 1964. That was the second body of, I think it used to be called Commission of Tibetan People's Deputy, and Rigala's mother and 2 others happened to be the first 3 Tibetan parliamentarians. And since then we had women parliamentarians, but there was a period of time where we didn't have anything. And then in 1991, it increased, the number of women represented at the Tibetan Parliament, it increased. A minimum quota of 2 was provided under the charter. But interestingly, I looked at, when I agreed to talk today, I looked at all the statistics, and we never had more than 4 women elected in each province. Minimum is 2 in each province, that the women could only come through the provinces, but not more than 4. I don't know what that says about our community. Even here, the Tibetan community in Britain, looking at the position of the chairperson, I don't know, from what I remember, only one of our females was in the position of a chairperson. That's like the top position. So I am thinking from all this, I am under the impression that the Tibetan mindset, when it comes to leadership, it's still very male-oriented. I think when a position comes up, it's as if we can't think of a female filling that position. It has to be a male. But I mean, having said that, I think there has been improvement, but it's still very much male-oriented. And the minister, we again on the executive side, we have the first, as I said, the first women minister was Jizu Pamela in 1991. It took us that long to have a female representation there, and since then again we had few, but doesn't seem to increase more than 2 at a time. Interestingly, our new Kalun Tiba, I think probably you have also watched it on, I was watching this video where Richard Gere was talking to the Tibetan staff in Dharamsala, and he was in a nice friendly way complaining about the lack of women at his talk and women taking up initiatives. And our Kalun Tiba, he said, it is true to a certain extent, but my Kashak, the face of my Kashak are all women. And he meant the home ministry, which is held by Gary Doma. That's the home face. And then he said on the international front, we have a new Kalu, Diki Choya, who is the face of the Tibetan in the international arena. So I don't know if that's an improvement or not, but there we go. The biggest change in the Tibetan women's status seems to have come from economic activities. I was looking at the demographic survey conducted by the Tibetan exile government in 2009, and it said that one data was collected on the workforce, and I think they've included people aged from 15 to 64. They're more male than female, but that when it comes to economic contribution, more female than male. So we're very hard working, the Tibetan women. And then I would like to touch a bit on the social state, the social status of the women as a daughter, as a wife, as a mother. I think I find it very interesting. As I said, as daughters, in my young days, they all prayed for a boy, basically. But then now, when I go back to India to visit my family, it's changed totally. And they would say, "Oh, you're lucky, your newborn is a girl." So now they're praying for girls instead of sons. And another aspect where the Tibetan women have really taken strong initiative is in family planning, education, to a point that now we have such a low birth rate in the Tibetan community. It's a bit of a worry. In a few years' time, it's going to. I think it might change the whole dynamics of the Tibetan tradition, between the old and the young. It's going to be something to watch out for. And then, as a mother, I think that's where we really enjoy the most, the respect and the devotion we get as a mother. I think that's more than I think. I may be wrong, but I personally think from the children's point of view, the respect and love for the mother seems to be more than it is for the father. And also Tibetan women, I think their devotion has been 100% when it comes to raising their family. They're totally dedicated there. And I don't know whether this has anything to do with it. Many of you here who are Buddhists will know about Habab Tujin. And that's when the Tibetans, the Buddhists celebrate the Buddha's coming down, descent from God, from heaven. And apparently it's believed he had gone to the realm of gods to repay the kindness of his mother. So for Lord Buddha to do that, I think the mere mortals, we should do that definitely, to pay back the kindness of your mother. And then education, I think women are doing very well, the Tibetan women. Last year, the Department of Education, in the report of the exam results, they said the Tibetan girls have scored better in their class 10 and 12 result, which is the equivalent of GCSE and A levels. Again, having said that, I think there is more men who are highly educated, even though the highest level achieved by both men and women seem to be same, but there's less number of females than men. Something to look into again, you know, my Tibetan young girls here. I think we have made a lot of progress, and the one area where we didn't make much progress, the Tibetan female population, is in religion. Unfortunately, it's you know, if you were to Google Tibetan nun, what would you find? The first few things that comes up is the Tibetan Nuns Project, or the Ani Choying Doma, the Tibetan nun, and she is more known for her singing talent than as a religious figure. So we don't have the equivalent of a female Rinpoche. We have so many Rinpoches, great teachers, great masters, but we don't seem to have the female counterpart in our community. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, again, we're very fortunate to have him. He has moved forward. He has said it is possible to have a female Dalai Lama, but no one else, no other incarnated Lama has said that. I mean, he is so open, so forward-looking. We're very fortunate, but still, I think I think the ceiling, like what you call this ceiling here, when it comes to religion, the ceiling is very low for the Tibetan nuns, I think, unfortunately. But I think, even though I say that there is still a male-dominated society, I think the pace at which we have improved, developed, is so great that there is big hope in the future. And I think the changes, the development, improvements are going to accelerate more and more. That's what I believe in. I don't want to take too long. I know it's late already. But to sum up, I think the changes in the status of Tibetan women came first through economic activities. They came in 59-60. We came into exile to a totally different country. They didn't speak the language. So everyone had to pitch in, and that, I think, provided a big opportunity for the women to show their worth. And the Tibetan women took on the challenge really well. I think it started with that. And then socially and education, of course, again, His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan government in exile have really provided equal education opportunity for everyone. And I think that's really helped in the advancement of women. But again, I would stress it's still a male-dominated society, male-oriented, especially when it comes to leadership. I mustn't forget to say here that even though it's a male-oriented leadership society, Gary Doma, the present Home Ministry, I want to pay my tribute to her here. She stood up in the Kalan Tibet race for the first time. I think that's great. And to most observers, it was apparent that our President Kalan Tibet, Lobsang Samten, he would come out the winner. But for her to stand up and say, "I am in this race," I think it's set an important role model for the future female leaders. You don't win the first time, but having started that trend, I think that. I think the Tibetan women owe a lot to her for doing that. If there's a small step, I think the impact will be huge. Okay, and then what I think the few challenges I think the Tibetan women will face now, and that is adaptability. We are moving in different environments, foreign environments, and we have to adapt. We have to come out of our stereotype roles to fit into those changing environment. And I think that's where our biggest challenge lies. Like, for example, I was brought up in India, and my role as a mother has been passed on to me by my mom and my grandmother. But here I am in the UK, raising my children here in a totally different environment. And I think we women, I think that's the same for all communities. We are the one who pass on the culture, the tradition. We seem to take greater role in that within our own family boundaries. And I think I can say that for myself and so many of my friends who I see here. We are trying to raise our children in two different cultures at the same time. We can't let them forget that they're Tibetans, but we want them to be comfortable and be part of the British society here. So that sort of, it's something our parents didn't have to face because they lived within the community, whereas we scatter. So I think that would be one of the greatest challenges that Tibetan women would have to face. Passing on the tradition. And then I would like to conclude with an outside perspective. I know I'm talking as an insider, but I wanted to know how others see Tibetan women. So I asked some of my non-Tibetan friends, what do they think of Tibetan women and what do they see? Interestingly, they all agree that Tibetan women are very strong, hardworking, well-educated. In particular, one friend mentioned, "Oh, you Tibetan women, you're so modest. You dress modestly, you behave modestly, you are soft, you have a good sense of humor. You're such nice people to have around." So, well, I think I'll conclude with that, and I'll welcome any questions you have. Okay. Yeah, so.